Welcome everyone to Unscripted Coding. Today I am going to try and wrangle my head around using React Native. Now, for those of you who don't know what React Native is, it is a framework, a system for you to create apps with one code base based on JavaScript and deploy it on Android, iOS, web, and to a lesser extent other devices like desktop. Now, for those of you who have watched other videos in my channel, generally speaking, if I'm going in that route, I would reach for Flutter. It just looks really, really good. It gets started really quickly, but React Native, and why I'm tackling it today, is because of the announcement of Expo Router version 2. Now, let me scroll back for a moment here. If you're trying to build an app, go on YouTube, find a React Native or a Flutter tutorial, and you get started very, very quickly. You can start making really beautiful screens in 10, 15 minutes. And especially with Flutter, they can look really good very quickly. And it's because there's so many off-the-shelf components. You have of course, buttons, images, text, but you're going to have all of this Material UI or iOS designed looks that you can start using, cards, modals, panels. They just look really, really good very quickly. And to a certain extent, this is true with React Native as well. This is not the best demo page available. It looks nothing like Flutter, but you can join together pieces like text, images, headers, footers very quickly as well. The problem I hit, and what makes Flutter really not fun for me to build, is navigation and routing. And what that means is going from one page to the next. So if I wanted to build this homepage, very quick, you can get it started immediately. If you throw some dummy data in there or you're pulling online data, it's very, very quick. But once I start going, say, click into this button, I want to see my profile, and it's pulling data on what I just had in this screen and moving it back and forth, it becomes very painful. There's no simple way of putting this. So if I select a color here, it looks like a color picker, and I want to move it onto the next screen and bring that data and navigate to the next page, it's very unintuitive to me personally. You have these routing, you have these navigators, and you have these packages that help you manage the state of your application, and you're trying to bring that state from one to the next to the next to the next, and just very, very painful for me. You have to think of it overarching. You have to think of your whole application together and how you bring that data through it, and it just never made much sense to me when you look at web developers. If I go from one page to the next, I don't really care what the structure is. I'm just looking at the next URL. So you can connect anywhere in the World Wide Web, but within your own app, you're just looking at the file structure, and you're saying, look for the next file located here. And I click it. And if I need to bring data, I can have it as query parameters. I can query the database in the back. I can use an API. Lots of different options available to web developers. And I suppose this kind of state management can happen as well. But I typically don't see that very much. And I think it is a difference because when you're using a web browser, the assumption, of course, is you're connected to a web. So if you're connecting to an online database, makes perfect sense that you don't need to care too much about it. For an application that might happen offline, if I'm playing an offline game or something like that, not you have fewer and more limited options. And I think that's kind of where the design came from. Anyways, this is a long rant to get to a point where Expo Router version 2 came out. And it tries to simplify this navigation for React Native development to look more like web development. And so you are importing components, but most importantly, you are routing. And let me see if I can find a good example here. No, I can't. But you are routing based on file structure. So for example, over here, navigating between pages, for everyone who is a web developer, this idea of linking with an href to another page makes so much sense. And you can carry some parameters over to make it to bring data from one page to another. And of course, if you're building a React Native application, you can have a database, a SQLite, for example, database in the background to keep bigger chunks of data. But between pages, for example, I might just have a user ID or some really quick indicator to bring one to the next and then query the database. Anyways, I have not played very much with React Native. You are talking to someone who has played around with it very early on, made the decision to go with Flutter, and has since touched it very little. So this morning I tried and set up a few pages, and I wanted to go through a very, very bare bones example, focused purely on Expo Router version 2. Just to show you what's possible. So, in that spirit, and while I do this, I plan to show you guys just a few of the features of React Native. I'm going to set this up from scratch. So, I have created a folder, completely empty folder, so you can see empty folder here. I assume you're going to install Node.js, you have Visual Studio Code, and you're going to use npm to install the right packages. I'm not going to walk you through that. But getting started was a bit tricky because the documentation is all right, but it was not exactly clear. So for example, I was stuck very much because this first command kept installing the template, and you would think it's a fairly blank template, but there's actually quite a bit of code in this template that is not necessary. So let's go back here. I go to the empty folder. I'm going to run, and why didn't it copy here? npx create expo app, and you could put the name right after, but I'm just going to let it run. From there, you're going to want to install the dependencies as well. Okay, so YouTube demo is going to be the name. It's going to take a quick moment to install everything, but while that happens in the back, I want to explain React Native very quickly. So unlike Flutter, Flutter has an engine, and a lot of people call it a game engine running in the back that draws all of these things. React Native actually looks at your code and runs the native components. So in Flutter, you can create a material-like app, meaning it looks like an Android app, and run it just fine on iOS. It will still look like an Android app because of the material design look. On the other hand, React Native has these components. So for example, text, header, buttons. These are completely agnostic, and when you run it on, say, iOS, you're going to have iOS-looking buttons. If you run it on Android, it's going to look like Android buttons, and that's the key here. I am just going to run... Oh, I'm just going to run the next installation here. This one. And so you can see it's not exactly large, but it does take just a moment. Oops, I have to go into the new folder first before running this command. Now what's interesting about React Native is that just like Flutter, you can use half React Native and then go into Android Studio and finish your app up. You can write sections that are specific to your Android version, iOS version. But the big bonus for React Native is this tool called Expo. And the idea is that it is on top of React Native, and it abstracts even more of it out. So this idea that you don't have to build iOS or Android specific versions, they're building more and more of these components that are agnostic to both iOS and Android. So in my view, if you're building a simple hobby app, I don't see why you would ever not choose Expo, other than making it harder for yourself, I suppose. And Expo Router is just another piece on top of that. Okay, so we have installed the dependencies, and I am going to open a new window here, new Visual Studio Code window, and I am going to the right folder first. So excuse me for just a moment here. Okay, so we have Visual Studio Code running now. And you're going to see the basic structure. This is actually not the ideal structure for Expo Router, and that's what, again, confused me. Expo Router is not by default. It's a great feature, but it's not default, so the structure is not built for it. So, couple things to make sure it works. You want to go into your package.json and add main package.json, and basically this is your front page, what shows up first when you run it. Next you put the scheme, and I didn't exactly find out what this is, but I suppose that if you get a larger app, you're going to want some sort of schema. And finally, these other pieces help with your development. So go back to app.json. Under web, we're going to put the bundler metro. And finally, you want to enable this plugin in Babel config. Okay, so from there, we're going to have to switch back and forth a little bit. What I want to show you real quick is we go into the folder, and we're just going to go npx expo start. Well, let's install our dependencies. And I think I must have missed that over here. Okay, so while those two are installing, we're going to get this all set up. So the big thing is that normally in a React Native application, you are normally going to have this app.js file. And this is where you start building. This is your first page, and you might build other apps. Now, you can configure it differently, but in Expo Router, you're going to have this app folder, and you might have your index.js, and the big one is you have a layout.js as well. So I'm going to copy this over and make these modifications. We have index and layout. How this works is that the layout is your base view. That means that you're going to, and I have this running on the side, I will just copy and paste this. You are going to have your base view. This means that if you want a header and a footer, if you want some sort of organization to show up in every page in the same route, in the same folder, you're going to have this. And so, for example, we're going to have tabs, and I'll show you how that looks like in a bit. I don't love the view, but it does show a few basic concepts. Of course, not installing. That is the problem with trying to run things on the side here with your attention divided. Okay, so layout is the base, doesn't have too much of a view, and then index, that's going to be our first page. And so I am going to again copy and paste some basic code here. And this is the stuff that I did earlier this morning. Normally, this would be roughly how your page would look like. And we can take this out as well. You have React Native components. You have text and view. And in this case, we have text. So this is just showing you how things look like. And then we want the link from Expo Router, and this is where we're going to link to our next page. Okay. Now here's the cool part. npx expo start. So once you've started this application, you can actually run this on the web. And I just click W, and I'm going to run it in this browser instead. It auto-opened on my non-private browsing window, but you're going to see that it's trying to build it on the side here for us, this first page. And you can see we have home page and about. What was it? Home page and about. Now, we're developing primarily for iOS and Android, so you can actually click A, and I have a phone connected. You need USB debugging, but it can also run it on the side. But what's really important here, while that's running, is you can see the tabs gives you a header and a footer for us to work with right now. If we were to change this layout to slot, we're going to have a different look. And as soon as I saved, it is rebuilt, and now we don't have a header or footer. And so there's a couple different options that you can use to very quickly have a header and footer, have navigation pages, have different looks. And the slot is blank, nothing, just whatever we have here. And maybe we can put some text in and images in between to create a custom header or footer. Okay. Now the big one here is if I was trying to do a second page on Flutter, it is really, really difficult. But here, I'm just going to create the next page called one.js, and we can have different different folders and a more detailed architecture, file structure. But in this case, we're just going to do another page, and we're going to call this second page, okay? And we're going to save. And this is the easy part. If we click the About button, from the index, we're going to one.js. In this case, we're going to go back to root, index.js, and so I can click between home page and second page. I know the text is really tiny here, but there's not really too much. And you can see over here, very much like navigating a URL. Let's go back to see if I've gotten my Android version running. Let me just pull this up. You can see very quickly that we have an app over here, and it's poorly done because it is in my navigation bar where the home and about are. There are like safe areas and so on, but I don't care too much about that. So let me just put a bunch of these to just bump us down. You can see, very poor idea, but that gets it out of the navigation bar for us. Now I show you this because we're going to be doing this primarily on this web page first, because it's just available on the side. I don't need to open up a phone, but if you want to see how it looks on the phone, having a physical device is really, really helpful, actually. Okay, going back now, we have our two pages. This, even in Flutter, this is okay to do, switching back and forth. But what's really problematic is bringing some data around. And this is where you have to dive a little bit deeper in the text. So I'm going to go here. I'm going to go into our one.js, and I'm going to use plain JavaScript, okay? So function random number min and max, and let's see. This has already been done for me. Now, when you do your href, you can actually start adding some additional parameters. So here, path name, we can put something basic. We're in one.js, so we want to go back to our root. And then the next one, we're going to have some parameters. Let's go random is a random number, very good. And we can put some other thing, random text, and we'll call it hello world. And so we're bringing two things into the next page. If we refresh here, you're going to see that when we click, you see this bar, URL bar, very hard to see, I know, on the screen, but it is exactly like web development, where we just have a question mark and then our two parameters, random equals 30 and random text equals hello world. Now, we haven't done anything here yet, but if we go back to the index page, we can actually start using what we see. And so we have a new import. Most importantly is use local search parameters. And I don't even think we need these. So here we're going to see parameters, use local search parameters, and then I have a new variable as well set up just in case we enter the page without anything. And so very simply, let's get rid of all these extra text boxes. If I go with another you know what, let's keep this simple. I'm going quite far in time. We can use curly braces and access our parameter here. And I apologize, it should have been random and random text. And we'll set some default values. So if I just load this, I'll call it 13, and we'll say goodbye world as our parameters. I see red on my device right now because this is not an appropriate place to save. So I'm going to go params.random, save, and it looks good again. Let's go to our main page here. Nothing. I go into the about page, nothing. If I come back, it's given me a random number, 48. And of course, you can start doing extra things here too. We can do a variable added number, and we'll take the params, and it is random, params random, and we will add 3 to it. And over here, we'll go added number, and that way we can start adding text here. Okay, so I'll go into the about page, click here, we get 43, and then I get 433. So I think I should translate this to an integer. So dot to integer, is that not JavaScript, turn string to integer, parse int. This time around, hopefully it'll work better. We'll go about, click here. In the URL, we get 14, and now we get 17. And so, again, this is not a very impressive application, but it is showing up on the phone and on the web together. One code base, very simple, but really important because you laid the foundations here. We talk a lot about other things we can building this out, but sometimes you want those bare bones. So here we have multiple pages navigating. We have data being passed between one page and next, and we're also just manipulating that number a little bit. Okay, honestly, that took a lot longer than I thought, so I apologize for the longer video, but hopefully we're going to play around with this a little more in future videos. Thanks for watching. I will see you next week.